everybody. Glad to see you here for our masterclass with Aaron VanderWeele. You're going to get to know Aaron over the next few minutes, and then we're going to really get into some of the music, which is, I know, the reason most of you are here. I just want to say that I'm actually really pleased to be able to host this. Aaron has been a big impact in my life and my playing career. Growing up in the Eastern Territory, he was the guy that I looked up to, and he was gracious enough to really pour into me, including, I don't know if he remembers, but there was almost a week, I came to his house right before I started college, and we did lessons every day. So he really invested in me. So I'm really looking forward to getting to talk with him today, and you guys get to get what he has to show for all of you. The last thing before we start is start thinking of questions. As we get towards the end, we're going to have opportunity for you guys to ask questions. Also, if you have any pressing questions while we're going through, don't interrupt, but maybe you can just put them in the chat and I can get you to ask the question live when we can take a break to answer that question. Okay? So, hello, Aaron. Glad to see you.
Hello. Hi, nice to see you too. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation to be here. Thanks to Nick for having me this week. It really is a pleasure. And I would just echo what Joel has already said, that if there's any questions, these things always work best for you guys that are here on this chat with us today. If there's anything that you want to gain from it, anything that I say that you want to have clarification, I really respect Joel's playing quite a lot. And both of us could have a nice dialogue about different things that have helped us grow and mature. But we want this to be beneficial to everybody that's participating in this. So feel free to ask questions and we can steer it to whatever way you want to. We have a bit of a skeleton outline, but we want to encourage your participation. So thanks again for having me.
Great. Well, let's we have a few questions where we just want to get to know a little bit more about who you are. So what do you do for a living?
So I have two jobs. My main job is for the Salvation Army. I have been an employee at Territorial Headquarters now since 1993. I started in the music department and joined the New York Staff Band at the same time and was in the music publications side of things. So preparing and helping out with that kind of thing. And I have a knack for selling and for marketing and really enjoy doing that. So the position that I went into was marketing director. And grew into that, and then went over to the trade department and kind of grew on that. And instead of just marketing music, marketed everything that the trade department has. So uniforms, fundraising supplies, you name it, anything that the supplies and purchasing department sells, that's what I was marketing. And then 2 years ago, I became the director of supplies and purchasing in the Eastern Territory. So most people would say that's the trade secretary. Like Nick is the music secretary, I'm the trade secretary.
Great. I'm sure that's, pretty time-consuming job and things like that, a lot going on.
Yeah, in today's world, especially with COVID and the different ways that it's pulled on our organization, it's really been incredible to see what the organization does to affect people's lives when there's a tragedy that hits, like this year, like no other. And so when you're sourcing materials for the Salvation Army, you're trying to get the most for the lowest price. And so then instead of just buying uniforms and fundraising supplies and things like that, our focus turns to food and to PPE supplies and sanitizers and gloves and all this kind of stuff that you'd never think that the Salvation Army Trade Secretary would ever have to be looking for. So we have been purchasing truckloads of these different types of supplies. And it's so overwhelming because you see these truckloads of things come to Territorial Headquarters, and then you see pictures of people receiving them that are in desperate need. They have nothing else. They've lost their job. They've lost, numerous people in their household have lost their job. So it's been really an amazing blessing to see the Salvation Army at work and to know that I played a little bit of a part in that, and it's been awesome to see. So it just is one of those jobs that it never stops. When you're home and you get emails and calls, just like most of us do in 2020, you got to do it whenever the work is there. So yeah, it can be very time consuming.
Yeah. And then you had mentioned that you have two jobs. So you do that, and also fitting in around that, you also do what?
Yeah, so I'm a euphonium instructor at Rutgers University. My actual title is Adjunct Professor of Euphonium at Rutgers University, and I've been there since 2012. So that means that basically maybe I've shaved it down to where I can get the most out of the time that I spend driving there and all that kind of thing. So Sunday afternoons and evenings, I'll go down and I do my lessons. I'll do chamber groups and all that kind of stuff. So I teach euphonium for undergraduate and graduate students at Rutgers University. And then I also coach some of our small chamber groups as well, our brass chamber groups. And I've been doing that since 2012.
Great. Well, just on that same thing, so you know, you're doing the work at THQ, but then you're also teaching at the university. What about performing groups? We know you play with the New York Side Band, and we might talk about that briefly in a little bit, but what about anything else outside of that, groups that you play with or coach or conduct?
Yeah, so just recently I accepted the position of music director for Princeton Brass Band. And I played in Princeton Brass Band for a couple of years, 2012, 2013. And then things in my life became getting busier and busier. My kids got busier with things as they do, going through those kind of, older, 9, 10, 12, year old gap. And then my older son became into his teenage years. And so he was getting busy with a lot of stuff. So it was time for me to leave the band at that time. But now the position of the music director came available. And so it's my first time really putting on the MD hat, where I'm able to really take a group of really committed musicians that really want to achieve for something for the band. Not necessarily like in competition or anything like that, but just people that are music teachers or people that have had a great relationship with music over the years. And they're looking for a great outlet for something that brought them a lot of enjoyment. So I would maybe be about a month ago, I think, that I was appointed as music director for Princeton Brass Band. And it's been a weird time for that because of COVID. And so we did get together somewhat, and we had a barbecue in the park. We had an outdoor kind of like just kind of a blow just to kind of have fun. And it was over the 4th of July weekend. So it was really enjoyable. So
Great.
try to fit that into the overall kind of schedule of where that happens. But the group rehearses maybe 10 minutes from where I teach on a Sunday, and they are also rehearsing on a Sunday. So it fits in very nicely in that kind of very delicate package of time.
Yeah. And you mentioned your boys. I know your boys. I haven't seen them in a long time, but I do know them. And they seem to be following in your footsteps in music, but also in hobbies and things like that. So just real briefly, just about your family a little bit.
Absolutely. So anybody that knows me knows that I'm a very, very proud father. I have 2 beautiful boys. They would blush if I said beautiful in front of them. They would be like, Dad, come on. But I have an 18-year-old son named Evan. He's going off to Seton Hall University in the fall. He's going to study business and economics. And then my younger son, Matthew, turns 13 this fall, and he is going into 7th grade. And both boys are very active in music. So they both participate in the junior band at the Corps. And the greatest thing for me is on a Sunday and a Wednesday. It's a really heartfelt thing for me because I sit right next to my son, who plays first baritone in our band, and then 2 seats down from him is my dad, who plays second baritone. We call him the anchor of the families there. And then right behind him is my brother in the tuba section, and then my sister-in-law plays flugel in the band as well. So it's really a nice bonding family thing that we all get to share that we're missing right now because of this strange virus. So.
Yeah, and now you mentioned so your dad playing in the band with you. I know that you grew up in the Army, but maybe tell us a little bit about growing up playing in the YP band, as you say that your sons do, and things like that. How you got to where you are now in the Army.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, Joel. Growing up in the Salvation Army, I grew up on the West Coast, and I grew up in Santa Monica, so Los Angeles area, right? I grew up going to the Torrance Corps, and my Corps bandmaster was Ivor Basenko. And then a couple of years after that, then my divisional music director became a guy called Chris Mallett, who was a phenomenal euphonium player and just a wonderful guy that encouraged everybody, especially young people though. And then a world-renowned cornet soloist, Terry Camsey, who wrote beautiful melodies and played just the sweetest tone out of all. He was appointed as I think an auxiliary captain in that area. And so the 3 of them were at the Corps together. But it wasn't all music growing up for me. When I first started, they stuck me on cornet like most kids do around the age of 7 or 8. I don't know exactly recall when it was. And I hated it. and I wasn't into it at all. I can distinctly remember one night, we were down at the Corps, and my mom said, "Okay, boys, let's go," because I have a younger brother, and we were messing around playing football or throwing something around. I don't know. And so she gets ready to go. She puts the car in reverse, and ka-tunk, she pulls up over something. She had run over my cornet because I didn't even think about putting it in the car. I couldn't care less about my cornet at that time. But then I got bigger. I'm a big guy, and got braces. Some people moved away from our core, and there became a position open for somebody to play baritone or euphonium. And at the exact same time, this perfect storm of this guy, Chris Mallett, who played euphonium, coming into our core. And it was just a perfect storm. So as soon as that kind of hit my hands, I can't really explain, but there was just something that it was different for me. And I just immediately wanted to try and sound like that. And I took it a little bit more serious. So, and then things started to come much, much quicker. And I noticed that as I put more time into the instrument, a lot of things started to happen very quickly. I started participating just like everybody else does, like in, divisional music groups and all that kind of stuff, divisional music camps. At the time we had a soloist competition. They encouraged me to play a solo. So I did. I bombed it, but I had a fun time doing it. The next year went back and did something a little bit more adventurous and felt really comfortable about it, and just got a lot of compliments about it and how well it was going. And then from there, within a very short time, I was playing solos all the time. And someone on this coast heard about it. The New York Staff Band had been looking for somebody to become their euphonium soloist and, principal euphonium for the staff band. I think, Major Tom Mack, who was the band's anchor on euphonium and just had done a wonderful job. He had a setback with his heart, and he had transitioned onto baritone at the time. So they were looking for someone really, in effect, to kind of take over from that. So one thing led to another. They arranged for me to come out, and I fell in love with the area, and they offered me an opportunity to come here, and it was the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. And I owe everything where I am to the Salvation Army. Every single thing, because up until that point, I never took music lessons in college or in high school. Everything that I gained was through the Salvation Army and through experiences like this. Now, it wasn't exactly like this, but for those of you who are listening and maybe see yourselves as like a 16 or 15-year-old person and wonder, what am I doing this for? I can just tell you that just by walking through the opportunities that the Salvation Army afforded me and listening to people like Nick and like Joel and the people that surrounded me, I just started to gain a lot of the information that they had accrued from going to university and all that kind of stuff. And I just listened to people like Phil Smith, who came to our music camp, people, like Bram Gregson, and other people like James Williams, who came to our camp and just spent time with us and just listened and started applying some of this stuff. And these doors started opening. And I believe it was totally a God thing that happened. And I just put a foot in front of the other and walked through the doors that were open for me. And it was a great thing. And I encourage you to just listen to the people that are around you and take advantages of the opportunities that our Army affords you.
Great. Yeah, I really believe in that. Is sometimes you don't realize who it is around you until you look back. Sometimes we're really blessed with people around us that have such amazing knowledge and skill sets. And sometimes just because we grew up with them, we don't realize it.
Right.
And then we look back and realize, oh yeah, there's so much that I learned from them, so much that they taught me. So just keep your ears open, everybody.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And like growing up in Torrance Court, I would never have known it at the time, just because the guys that I referenced, those three musical giants for me, they just treated me like I was part of their family. And I didn't have an understanding for who they were and the knowledge that they had gained. But so as a result of that, that really affects how I teach and how I interact with other people now. So I just do want to say to anybody that's participating in this, if you have any questions or anything like this after this, if we're not friends on Facebook, hit me up, send me a friend request, send me a private message. If there's anything about your playing that you're unsure about that you maybe don't want to ask today, I believe in paying it forward, because people always did that for me. And so it really affects how I teach today, whether it's in the Salvation Army or outside the Salvation Army. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and that actually leads directly into the very last question I had for you before we get into the actual music of it is,
Yeah.
how are you intentional about mentoring upcoming euphonium players in the Salvation Army?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say, Joel, that it's just euphonium players. I would
It's
just
true.
say that it's anybody that sees an opportunity to use music to praise the Lord and to use their gifts that they've been given from the Lord. A few years ago, I was involved in spearheading an idea that Major Mac had that he talked to the band about with Future All Stars. That idea emerged because there were several prominent bands that were creating youth bands, as it were, a way to pay it forward for the next generation of brass band players and young musicians and all that kind of thing. So that's one of the ways where we really seek out ways to cultivate relationships with young people. And again, taking on that kind of friendship, that mentor process whereby you don't look at somebody like they're this unattainable kind of godlike figure at all. That's totally ludicrous to me. It's just that they're a real person and that they go through real life struggles and real life, triumphs every day, just like we do. And it's a great thing to bring people along to that. Another way that I go about it is in our core, like I take care of the junior band. So a few years ago, I had noticed that the junior band, my boys were participating in that. And I noticed it would be a great opportunity for bonding with me and my boys. And I just asked if there was an opportunity for me to come in and maybe teach some lessons. And they talked to me at the core, well, how about like if you did the junior band, the guy who's doing it has done a great job for a while now, but he's kind of looking for a little bit of a break. Would you be interested in that? And so I have, and it's been a great experience. And I bring in a lot of older players just to kind of mentor these younger players like we do at Star Lake Music Camp all the time. So that, and then I'm involved in Star Lake Music Camp and I do things like this just because I love it. It's just a great way to connect with people. It keeps me young, it keeps me fresh, it keeps me sharp in terms, because you never know what some kid is going to say to you and ask you to do or anything like that. So it's just a lot of fun. I just love it.
Great. Well, everybody, we're going to head into really some of the actual music making side of it. So I have some questions, but also just a reminder, if you have anything that pops up, this is really going to be the time. If you need clarification on anything that's said, this is the time to do that so we can get the most out of it for you. Okay. So Aaron, one of the things that people instantly recognize about your playing, about your recordings or seeing you live is about your tone, this rich, round tone that you have. And I know that didn't happen by accident or unintentionally. So if you could talk and show us maybe some of the ways that you work on developing tone and how you would encourage people to develop their tone on their instrument as well.
Sure, absolutely. So the first thing I always start with is we have to have an idea of how we want to sound. And there's no better kind of understanding of that than listening to really great players. So if this was a basketball camp that the NBA was doing or the G League was doing or something like that, and all of the people who are participating in this were basketball players instead of musicians or brass band musicians, I could say to you, who's your favorite basketball player and who do you model your game after? If you're a guard, you might say Steph Curry, you might say Kyrie Irving. If you're a forward, you might say KD or LeBron, somebody like that. If you're a big man, you have your whole choice of, the Greek freak who's going to be awesome and has like all these kind of power moves and finesse stuff and all that kind of stuff. But if I say that to a euphonium player when I go out to divisional music camps, sometimes I get this look of like, and they have like no idea. And these smartphones that we carry around with us, they're mini computers, and you have such access to the greatest players in the world. So if I play, think about the amount of time that you spend practicing your instrument. If you're a cornet player, if you're a horn player, if you're a trombonist or euphoniumist, wouldn't you want to kind of have an idea for what that could or should sound like? And then I like to just kind of get I like to pull from a couple different players some of the sounds that I like. So a couple of the sounds that I like are a guy named Demondre Thurman. He's probably my favorite euphonium player. He's a guy that he was in Alabama. I think he still has his home in Alabama, but he's also teaching in Indiana. He's just a world-renowned euphonium soloist that has just for me, just the prototypical sound of what a euphonium should sound like. It can sound dark and bright. It can sound dark, but it can also sound bright. It can sound soulful. It can sound like it's singing like an operatic style. It can be incredibly virtuosic. And then I can also listen to a guy like David Childs, who can do everything. He's got a little bit more of a quicker vibrato, so I can learn how to bring some of that into my sound. And then there's another guy that I like to listen to that a lot of people, may not know at all. His name is Thomas Rudy, who is a very, compared to David or DeMondre Thurman, would be a much lighter player. He's got so much more finesse, almost an effervescence when it comes to his playing, but it's so musical and it's so heartfelt. And I just want to always bring more of that, especially because of the content that I play the most. Sure, at school, with the undergrad and graduate students that I work with, we're working on some of the most advanced concerti that are written for the euphonium. But most of the stuff where I hang out most of the time is at church, where I'm playing melodies and they all have words, and you have to be able to relate to those words and lean on certain words. So I like a lot of Thomas Rudy's playing. But I would say to you, if you're a cornetist, there are so many great cornetists that you can listen to, and you could just type up, great cornet player, on YouTube and just listen. Or you could type in the names of Tom Hutchinson, Phil Cobb, David Dawes, Philip Smith, Richard Marshall. There, you have lots of choices of the cornet player. So I just think about starting, right there. And then you want to just kind of copy them. Like, again, going back to that idea of if you were at a basketball camp, or say like you were at a football camp, say like you're a quarterback, I would say to you, who's your favorite quarterback? And you would say to me, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Lamar Jackson. And you'd say, I like to try and copy what that guy does. The exact same thing could and should be done when you play your instrument. So I would just say that's a great starting place.
Yeah, and I think what that is the other thing too. That's a great starting place. Like you're saying, having the concept in your mind, starting to copy. But so once you are starting to do that, where do you go from there? How do you start to develop your own sound?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand how you sound, and so I think it's important just to record yourself and to try playing melodies, and to really understand, especially if you're a low brass person. Now, we say this all the time, but people just don't understand the volume of air that you have to take in for the sound to actually resonate in the instrument. We play an instrument, especially like if you play euphonium or tuba, that faces up, right? So unlike, trombone or trumpet that faces out, where people can hear it so much clearer, you really, really have to work. And then you have all this tubing that you have to push the air through. So, I told you about growing up listening to a guy called Chris Mallett. That would have been that first kind of sound that I fell in love with, that I wanted to emulate. Well, Chris, I didn't realize this at the time, but Chris grew up as a cornet player or a trumpet player, and he still played trumpet when he was playing euphonium. So there are a couple of things that he did that I didn't really know. I just did what he did. But one of the things was that he would play 4 or 8 bar phrases. As a euphonium player, one of the things that's probably the biggest thing that's developed with me over the time that I've played it is sometimes I'll take a 1 bar phrase, or I'll take breaths in between, 2 or 3 notes, just because I'm looking for the note to do something and to really speak through the instrument and try and reach the back of the hall. So I would say to you just that you have to understand the idea of air, and you have to understand about putting, hot air into the instrument. There's a melody, right? And one of my favorite melodies is In Christ Alone. If I play this melody with just like that nasally sound and that kind of cold air, it kind of sounds like, like the typical sound. So, I mean, anybody can sound like that, right? And we've heard lots of players sound like that. So sometimes in lessons, if I notice that a player is kind of closed off like that, I'll kind of ask them, do you hear how it kind of sounds, like that maybe it's like a little bit like tense, and I'll ask them, can you kind of do that even more for me? Can you get it even tighter for me? And that's by closing down the lips and closing down the throat and all that kind of stuff, and putting virtually no air through the instrument. So what I'll do with a younger player at that point is I'll say, now try to back it up and do the complete opposite and hold everything open up as wide as you can and as deep as you can. So they start to do that, and they start to open up just a little bit. So we try and just kind of get them to understand the relationship that air has, right? So one of the things, I don't know if you guys can see this, but like in my music is I'll do these big block lines, and they're like they literally are every 2 bars. And it's really, really big. So it's just a reminder to myself, breathe, breathe. And, you know, you have to teach somebody the relationship of maybe robbing from a note. So maybe stopping a note, like if I've got a dotted quarter, maybe I don't play that full value, but I take in air so that I support the next phrase. And then, especially in an acoustic like this, like I'm in my core hall right now, it's a nice warm sound so that the ring can kind of make up for that fact that I'm just a little bit robbing from that note, and helps me just to give a bigger, warmer sound. So you start focusing right away on air and how they're breathing, and then just how often they're breathing. And again, it's just something that a lot of players don't really understand. And so it tends to have to be kind of hammered home and home and home over and over again. For straight up euphonium players, I always encourage them to play with a mute, something that creates a lot of resistance. So most of us practice in, like if you're in college, you're going to practice in, you know, something kind of like a very small room, kind of like an 8x12 room or an 8x8 room. It's like a jail cell, right? And if you're not careful, it can kind of feel like that if you view your practice as something you have to do. But if you can bring some imagination into your practice and some goal setting, you can really start to see how it can transcend your playing. And so what the mute does, those of you who are not at school studying music, maybe you're practicing and you're usually going to practice at home. That's what I did, and I mean, small little bedroom, and it's very easy to fill that space. But how often do we ever play in a space as small as our bedroom or in our living room, if you're fortunate enough where your parents let you practice in the living room, right? It's the room that you play in is usually going to be a nice concert hall size. So you have to try and think about filling that up. And so the mute can really help give resistance. So I have a couple different mutes that I work with, but also playing outside is extremely useful. And then, of course, there are some other techniques as well, just to build in some airflow into the instrument. One thing would be just kind of, buzzing, with your mouthpiece, just mouthpiece alone. Joel, what do you use when you're working on your sound and all that kind of stuff? What are you thinking about, like with people? Are you using like the same type of stuff, like practicing outdoors, practicing with mutes, practicing in big halls?
Yeah, especially working with mutes, because like you said about the resistance, if you can start to get that mute to really buzz and vibrate, then that's showing that you're putting a lot of the air into the instrument. So then when you take that mute out and you play the same way, it's all suddenly much, much bigger.
Yeah, it's a great help to me. And I've been a huge advocate for the Dennis Wake euphonium practice mute. It's a big black mute that usually just stays at home for me. And especially if I'm working with a student that it has a really closed off sound, what I'm going to do is put them on that. Even if they don't have the money to get one, I'll let them borrow mine maybe for a month or something like that. And what happens, even just in the first 10 minutes of their playing with that, it opens it up from a closed sound to a really open sound. it then kind of dies back down, and it kind of, kind of dies back off and goes back to that closed sound, because they haven't really trained themselves how to breathe and open up all the time. But if you practice at home, and if you're serious about, your practice, a nice little investment. I'm not a gadget person. I'm not a person who's going to recommend to you spend, $10,000 on this, that, and every other gadget. But I do believe in this because I've seen it transition and really transform a lot of players. And it's a Dennis with Practice Butte. It might cost you about $130, 135, something like that. You get it on Amazon or any of your music stores, and it can really, transform your brass playing, especially if you're a low brass person like euphonium or tuba or trombone.
Yeah. There is one thing I want to make sure that I point out that, Aaron, that you said that I don't want people to miss. When he showed us that music there, it was just for In Christ Alone, which is simple melody and things like that. And he talked about how he has these black bars written for him to breathe. So I just want that to sink in for a second. For something as simple as just playing the hymn tune, he's still marking all of these things like breaths, just because it's so important. I think to all brass players, because we're all using air as we're playing, but especially low brass players where we got to figure out how we're going to make our air work. To mark even these simple things, there's no shame in putting that pencil to your paper.
Yeah, exactly. And just a couple other things that I'll touch on. I am not a vocalist. Joel, you and your brother are great vocalists. You guys have great voices. So you'll come to this a lot better than somebody like me. My claim to fame with singing was being part of Jeanette Pasenko's Touring Songsters when they toured a lot and did a lot of different stuff. And I was one of the guys in the back that barely kind of mumbled. But I can still tap into some of that stuff that I learned through Jeanette and Ivor, when I think about my brass playing. And so one of those things is just to sing the melody. And if I suck at like singing at pitch or anything like that, I can just do it monotone. So I would just go da 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 da. So I would have, and I work with lots of like young teenagers that are in the transition kind of period, going from a young person to like an adolescent. And so the last thing you're going to want like some kind of like teenage boy to do is be singing, because their voice is breaking and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, it's okay. It's all right. No problem. Let's just both do it together and we'll just kind of work at this. And all you want to think about is air in and air out, and taking very, very deep breaths. And it's not just the amount of times you're breathing, it's how you're breathing. So there's lots of different ways that people talk about this, but for me, I keep my top lip on the instrument and on the mouthpiece at all times, and then I drop that like that, right? So it's the idea of the breathing gym, with was developed by Pat Sheridan and
Sam Palafian.
Sam Palafian, and you're talking about how you breathe, right? So they talk about, put the shark fin on your head like that, and then put it up here, right? And so what you want to breathe is with an open O sound, right? Right? You want to have that type of sound when you breathe. Drop the tongue and try and get that sound. If you're hearing this, if you're hearing that when you breathe, then you're breathing and you're just giving a lot of resistance to your air. If you can create the open O vowel when you're breathing, you're going to have a lot more success, and you're going to be able to take in more air. I recently had a lesson with David King, who was doing some conducting for the New York Staff Band. It was great to spend time with them. And we talked about just how to get in more air. And he talked about taking air in and then lifting up the ribs as well. And that's another part over the last, I would say, probably 4 months that I've been adding and trying to incorporate into my breathing. Dr. Brian Bowman talked a lot about that, not only breathing down, but breathing out. And it's the same exact concept that David was talking about. But David explained it in a great way that really helped me kind of get just that little bit more air into my playing. Because when he was in front of the band, and our own conductor, Derek, does a great job. He always wants more and more and more and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, bro, I'm giving you everything I got, you know? But David really helped just kind of get even more out of that. And if I can get another 3% out, then I want to try and do that. So those things, you know, and just being aware and just being really intentional, like, you know, Joel referenced like the slashing of just on a melody, something like that. The melody is the most important part. I would say to you that we could practice technique all day long. What most people leave our concerts and with the blessing of a melody and the words associated to them. And I mean, I've had a long career in the New York Staff Band back to 1993. And most often they can be wowed by the band's power or by the band's technical ability. But more often than not, it's just an overwhelming melody that kind of comes over that speaks to somebody at that time. So the idea of playing melody is super, super important. If you're a low brass person and you're studying, you should be working at things like the Rochu books, you know, the Bordoni, Rochu. There's, you know, 3 different books of those. You should be working at trying to play melodically and trying to make your sound like singing sound at all times. Just always remember that, you know, this instrument is an extension of you. You are the instrument. So Joel will sound the exact same whether he picks up a piece of junk horn down at the core or his $9,000 Prestige euphonium, right? Or, you know, and that's because what he has is, this is his instrument, right? The euphonium itself, or your trombone or your cornet, is just an extension of you. So you have to really work at this all the time. And that's hearing that melody, singing that melody, practicing breathing. And it can really transform your playing. And I do want to just, again, hit on the fact of recording yourself. You have to listen to yourself recording and just listen to that. And again, you're listening to the people that you admire, right? And you're trying to say, am I starting to sound like that, right? And I would just say, listen to how you're breathing as well. Just don't listen for split notes and wrong notes. Listen to how you're breathing. If you're breathing like that, that's a no-no. We want a deep, deep breath.
Great. Well, one of the other things that I know that is a real demand, even inside the Salvation Army as a soloist, but also increasingly as a section player, is the incredible range demands, both on the high and the low end, particularly for the soloist in the low end. But so how do you think that, how would you explain expanding that range, both in the upper and the lower registers?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing it. And I'm a person that believes in practicing scales and practicing up and down, you know, on the scale, just to extend the range of what I'm doing and comfortably doing. Most importantly, again, is this idea of air. We're never going to go anywhere without use of our air. So if I'm doing just like a standard concert B flat, you know, scale, if I do that and I crescendo up to that high B flat, then it's, you know, it's going to have that resonance. If I try and do a decrescendo on that, that's something that an arranger or a composer will do to make that little sequence infinitely more difficult. So if you have a habit of decrescendoing as you go up a scale or up a passage, it just makes whatever passage you're playing infinitely more difficult. There are some reasons why that. Most of those reasons are that we don't think that we're good enough. We don't think that we can do something. And so we know it's not a strength. So we kind of tense up, everything tenses up, and the windpipe becomes super, super tight like that. And the end result is a decrescendo as you go up the scale, right? And it's fine, right? But you know, if I can crescendo through that whole time, it's really going to help everything that I'm doing. Now, like Joel said, you know, high B flat, high C, for all us brass banders, is nothing these days. In the solo that I was just playing for you, this is a wonderful solo. This In Christ Alone. But the only setting for it that I know right now is with band. And in order to power over a band, you have this kind of huge thing at the chorus that comes in, and it goes up to a high F. And then it hits on a note that's not a great note for euphonium, which is high E, right? Which I use for second valve. You could use 1 and 2, 2, or sometimes open, depending on the model of euphonium you have and your mouthpiece setup. I use 2 just because it kind of is the most clear for me. But nothing is going to happen if we don't use air. So here's the statement that comes, right? And I'm going to give it just a little bit more when I go up to that high F, right? If I back off that high F and if I do it anything less than that, it's going to sound really, really tight, and it's probably not going to come out. It's just going to be like a little squeak, right? If I squeeze down on that, right? So on, right? So you're getting the sense that it doesn't come out if we don't push in, and if it's not like you really got to sell out. There's no kind of half-hearted high Fs that are happening. But that's just, again, like the high F is kind of where the high C was maybe back in the 80s and early 90s for euphonium playing. Nowadays, you've got music that goes up into high G and high A flat, that they're expecting. And then there's an ossia part that's written, but in one of the solos, one of my students played recently, it's a concerto by a guy called Joel Collier. It's a really wonderful piece, and it really does go even higher. And there's no ossia, there's no alternative. You have to play the notes that are written there. But again, that's the top of the top, music. But the other thing that I would be remiss if I said is it's not just air, and it's not just practicing getting up into the in the range, but you have to work on your corners. So lip flexibility studies. So I do these kind of things all the time. I work out of a book. All my students at Rutgers, part of their curriculum is to have this book. It's called The Brass Gym, again, with Sam and Patrick. So Sam Palafian and Patrick Sheridan. You can get that book, $40 on pretty much every site. Bass clef, treble clef, you name it, you get it. But there's these things called lip flips, and it just works on moving the air, no tongue. Great example of what not to do. And then I feel like I want to do like a minor third. But in terms of extending range, we want to look to something even more. So if we go to the perfect fifth, or if we go to the octave, right? So forth, right? So what am I doing there? I'm just I'm tightening my corners and I'm pushing the air out faster, right? We can extend that. So forth, right? And all of that is just going to come from tightening corners and using a lot of air to get through the instrument. But again, the top note is going to be the louder of the two notes, right? That's the target note that we're going towards. So whatever your next note is that you're moving towards, say like you're working on getting a high C, that's a great, great goal. And that has to be the goal. And then we're not talking about 30 odd notes. We're talking maybe about an extra, maybe fifth or fourth, right? That we're going to try and increase it just to go up a little bit to get to the ranges that Joel's talking about here. And the same is true for going down low. A lot of teachers where I work, they love playing etudes down an octave, getting very comfortable in that bridge where everybody has a bridge that goes from playing their low note So for me, my bridge is right before that pedal C. So I have to kind of reset. And so always getting in that bridge before you get to that pedal C and resetting so that it doesn't sound like so disjointed. It has to come with a lot of practice, and you have to take time, to really focus on that.
Yeah, that break is a killer.
Yeah.
I remember one of the worst things is when you get a piece that does this like scale down into the depths for some reason, and you're just like, well, here we go.
Yeah, exactly. You have to, I always call it, creative, artistic license, right? Artistic, right? But it's no, I got to reset my chops, or else I'm not going to be able to play that next,
right.
notes. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And so I just want to take a second. We're coming short on time. We still have a few minutes left and a few more things we're going to talk about, but I just wanted to give a few reminders to everybody about some things that are coming up. So just a reminder that at 1 o'clock today, there's a class with Andrew Blythe, and at 3 o'clock with Stephen Byrne. So you'll want to check those out. Also a reminder that at 7 o'clock tonight is solo night, and I know that you'll want to see your peers as their videos are played for solo night. So definitely check those things out. So there's your commercial break. But coming back to what we have going on is we just got a question in, and Rodney, do you want to just ask the question yourself?
I mean, I'm kind of busy, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll ask for Rodney on Rodney's behalf, because it actually leads into the question that I was going to ask. He asked about building technique besides scales, and I was going to talk about dexterity and getting around the instrument, because as you know, and many of us know, that's a huge requirement, particularly as euphonium players. That's a huge requirement, is that dexterity.
Yeah, I mean, really, all music comes from scales. So whether you're practicing your natural minors, your harmonic minors, or your melodic minors, 2 octaves all the time. So in our school, in order for you to be prepared for your jury, no matter what instrument you play, you have to be proficient at all of your scales, 2 octaves, and it's just called your tech jury. So it's part of the curriculum that's taught. And then the idea for, whether you're a trumpet player or euphonium player, that's where you're going to get most of like your noodling, right? So for your busy work on the euphonium, you just have to be diligent in practicing all of those different types of scales. Then you want to expose yourself to music that is varied. So in the Salvation Army, we tend to have a lot of music that might have 1 or 2 sharps, 1 or 2 flats, more flats than sharps. One of the things that you start getting into when you see more music is you see more music with a lot more sharps. And you have to be comfortable with your third valve. And so I'm a very big believer in technique books. So Arbenz, I grew up, probably the best gift that was ever given to me was from Ivor Basenko in terms of my music development, was a copy of the Carnival CD and my first Arbenz book. And that was a package Christmas, like, here you go. Because we were very, very close growing up. I would always call him uncle. And he gave me this book, and it just opened my eyes to this. And if you don't know the CD that I'm talking about, you can go on to YouTube and check it out. It's called Carnival, and it's by a trumpet player called Wynton Marsalis. And it just opened up the idea of that is how easy it should sound like whenever I'm playing anything technical. And so we want to always be thinking about how we can make it sound easy and be singing through our instrument all the time. The other day, I was doing a similar thing. It's funny because Wednesday. Last Wednesday, I was doing something for Star Lake. This week is TMI, and the next week is CMI, all on Wednesdays. But last week, I was talking about just playing a piece because they have a faculty solo recital or something like that. And Derek asked me to play something that had some like variations in it or something like that, something that was a little bit more technical. So I played the Simone Mantilla Endearing Young Charms. And the very first variation is something that is, typical, right? So in that right there, what I want to do anytime that I play that, I just want to be kind of singing through that. So I want to have, I don't want to just play it like it's all the exact same. So I don't want to play it choppy. I don't want to play it too pecky. These are just 16th notes that I'm playing here, but they have some articulation. So I want to give it just a bit of a ride, right? I'd like to do it like as if I was singing that. So again, I'm going to practice. And the other part of that is in my technique. And in my tonguing technique, what I don't want to do is I don't want that to be choppy. So the first two notes are marked staccato on my instrument, right? I don't want to have that choppy, pecky kind of sound. So one of the things that I have to do in this is I have to work on my fingers first, just to make sure that everything in the technique is okay. So I do that by slurring. That kind of thing. I'll make sure that the fingers are okay, and then I'll add the tongue to make sure that the tongues and the fingers are working just perfectly together. And then I want to add a bit of line and a bit of nuance. But none of that would be possible if I didn't know my way around F major, concert F major, right? So you have to be well aware of what goes on, and then all different arpeggios. So I want to practice my arpeggios. I want to practice things like, the Arbenz book, Clark, Vizzuti. If you have access to a book called the Koprosh Studies, there's 2 books of Koprosh Studies that I work from. And then there's all sorts of other etudes that are meant to push technique and expose you to playing in different keys. You won't be comfortable if you're not used to looking at music like that. You just won't be. And the other thing that I would say that you have to be very careful about in 2020 is that most people want to take a magic pill whereby this just happens. And so many things, the process for which have been sped up in our world. And it just is not like that. And it's not a perfectionist type of thing. You have to be okay with failing and failing over and over and over again. And that process is a very beautiful one. It's one that carves out character. And if you're a person that you expect everything in your life to come easy to you, then this is not the thing to be doing. Not a whole lot of things that are worthwhile in life are just easy. Life itself is not easy. So this builds in lots of great life lessons, and you have to be okay at starting at some point. So I would say to you, like, one of the questions last week in the master class was, how do you practice the hard stuff, right? You have to understand correct notes and rhythms first, and you have to go at a very, very steady tempo. So that was a performance tempo. If you listen to recordings of this piece, you might hear it at that tempo, you might hear it faster. You never start to practice technical stuff at the performance tempo. You go at a very, very slow tempo. So if I was working at that, and I was at the very onset of practicing that, even if I know my way all around this particular key, I would still just want to make sure I have a good understanding of the relationship of the notes. And so forth, right? I don't want to go any faster than I can and absolutely nail every single note. And then I have to have a very, very loud metronome. So you have to be working with metronome so that your rhythm is intact and your rhythmic integrity is solid. You don't want to be, now mine was very rubato, and that again comes under that kind of idea of artistic license. I just say I have to take good breath, and so I can kind of like stop and start the ends of phrases and all that kind of stuff in a rubato style. But really, when you're practicing something, you have to have a good solid metronome and understand what the rhythm is and the correct notes. And I would say also that when you first start off, you have to be very, very strict with yourself. And you really are setting up it's like a fishing net, right? Don't let anything through the net. When you're first starting out, be incredibly strict on yourself, so that when you speed things up, then you're not having many mistakes, because there will become more mistakes as you speed things up. So if you're letting 1 or 2 mistakes happen when you're going really slow, probably going to get about 8 or 9 when you're going faster. So you have to be very diligent with that and be very, very hard on yourself. And then eventually the technique does come. Like for me, starting to practice, like when I transitioned onto euphonium from that time when I was that kid who was on the cornet, and at 13 is when I went onto euphonium, I would say it was maybe a couple years and I was playing this same level stuff. It was just practicing my scales and practicing my Arban's book. And it's all the different facets of the Arban's book. It's not just, what you can already play. You have to practice the stuff you can't play.
That's right. That's the big thing. Practice the stuff that you're not good at. If you just play the stuff you're always good at, that's all you're going to be good at. So.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And take your time. Take your time with it. But, your practice really has to have a goal, an attainable goal. And you should make sure that your practice goal is very well defined, so that when you sit down and you leave that practice setting, you know exactly what you've achieved. And then it's meant something to you. It hasn't just been it's not just time that you're spending in that jail cell where you're forced to practice. It's actually time well spent and becoming, very intentional with your time. And in today's world, like Joel talked about before, he asked me about the different things that I'm involved with. My number one thing in my life is I'm an involved dad. I want to be there with and for my kids for everything that's going on in their lives. And I have 2 jobs, right? I'm a person that lives in a very densely populated area in the country, right? So it takes traffic to get there and all that kind of stuff, and demanding jobs, right? So there's not a whole lot of time, right? And so for a lot of you that are on this call right now, maybe you're involved in this club at school, in this band, then you got your Salvation Army activities, and maybe you are also a gifted basketball player or something like that. So immediately you're starting to see this tug on your time. Well, how do I have time to practice? That's why your practice has to be intentional. So if you have 25 minutes to practice, then that's what it is. Like I practice in my office and I use this mute. I use this mute that travels with me. This is many of you might see like a Dennis Wick red travel mute. This was the mute that existed before that. They still sell this. But I think the enhancement of this is the red Dennis Wick travel mute that they sell now. But this just fits right inside my euphonium, and it fits inside euphonium inside the case. So inside my office at territorial headquarters, I just close the door and I start practicing, and that's how I get my time done, and I just make sure that it's intentional, and I work on the stuff that I can't play because I don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, it's that's one of the things that I really much want to echo that, because that's one of the things I realized after I finished graduate school is I still had the same demands on me as a player and had far less time to spend in that little jail cell practicing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just finding the ways to be more efficient with and intentional with my time. So
And I'll tell you something else that's really cool, Joel. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
Oh,
One of these things like that I love using are my Bose headphones, or any type of wireless headphone. Doesn't matter what brand it is. And they just go on, and I'll practice to, like, one of the pieces I love practicing these days is Demondre's recording, his live recording of the Heritage Concerto, with the U.S. Army Band. And so I'll, instead of just practicing etudes and stuff like that, I'll play along to one of my favorite players playing a piece that I really love. Maybe that, or I'll play the UFO Concerto, or I'll play the Cosmic Concerto, or I'll play, something that I'm listening to all other sounds around me, so I can kind of envision myself practicing. It's not just me going bum 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 bum. It's not that, even though that's helpful too, But
yeah.
these are great. Technology is awesome with the way that it has come along to help you.
Yeah.
And I would say utilize that and be creative in your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to make sure that we have enough time for anybody else to ask some questions before we go.
Sure.
So if anybody else has some questions, now's the time. You can either, I see a hand going up, I'll get to you in a second, Steph. But you can either unmute yourself to ask, or you can type in your question and I can ask it for you. But I saw Stefan raise his hand. So Stefan, what's your question?
So my question is for Aaron. So is there anything that we can do less for, like, for when we play our low brass instruments?
Is there anything you can do less?
Yes, less.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So Steph, do you mean, is there, so what, try to ask it again. What kind of thing doing less?
Yes. Like I'm talking about like less falling behind.
You mean like in band?
Yes.
And paying attention to that? Yeah, it's really, that kind of thing is being in that chamber ensemble setting, right? And listening to what's going on around you. I'm always encouraging my chamber players to play with their eyes, right? So when you're talking about playing behind, it's usually because someone is just kind of down in what they're doing and they're not paying attention to what's going on around them. So in a chamber setting where you have a conductor, it's such a huge advantage, because you can actually look up from your stand and you can look at the guy who's telling you and moving the stick along and all that kind of thing. But even if you're in a small chamber group where you don't have any conductor, you have to be playing with your eyes, and your ears, looking around at the musicians around you so that you understand your relationship of what you're playing and what everybody else is playing. And then, Stephanie, it's just a matter of really being intentional and focusing on what's going on in that kind of setting. In the chamber group setting, we really have to use the ears a lot about, and find out what's going on. We have to understand the music and not just be stuck into kind of like the tempo that we have, in our mind. We have to hear what's going on in the rest of the room. So in terms of doing less, I'm not really sure there's ever a time. I'm always trying to find times to do more, and just kind of pay attention and get everything I can, to try and go more. And that helps me worry less, and it helps me just kind of be have less anxiety when I play if I'm well prepared, Unfortunately, that's the only way that I know it really works. Just in terms of my own experience.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for the question, Steph. Chase, I saw you turn your camera on, and I don't think that was an accident. Do you have a question?
Yeah. You might hear this and think that it might be somewhat of a dumb question, but I know for me personally, I'm a trombone player and a Salvation Army trombone player. And as a Salvation Army brass player, we often are tasked with playing a lot of instruments. I know from the people that I see in the hall right now, there are a lot of low brass players. Rodney, for instance, plays trombone, but he's also a great euphonium player. And you touched on it earlier. You played cornet when you were young, and I don't know if you play other brass instruments. I will assume you do, maybe just because you're.
I do, like for my junior band, like we have I always get younger conductors involved just to try and get them in front of the group. So I'll grab a cornet and I'll play like with the second cornets. It's probably the worst thing for my chops to do that, but I don't really care, about that. Really, it's more about just kind of being in there with the kids and just hanging out with them and seeing how they're doing and understanding what they're getting, what they're not getting.
Yeah. My question is, are there any benefits or to your playing as your main instrument? Any benefits that you maybe have noticed or received from playing different instruments like cornet, or maybe playing a tuba on Sunday morning, then going back to playing euphonium or something like that? Or would you just say, do your best to stick to your main instrument and only your main instrument?
Yeah, so I mean, I come at this, it's a great question. I come at this from a couple different angles. One of them is just like the diehard euphonium player, that my main gig, one of the ways that I sell myself to private students is I'm not a tuba player who also plays euphonium, and that's my secondary instrument. I'm not a trombonist who also happens to play euphonium, and I pull it out one time a year when the orchestra is doing the planets or something like that. I am a euphonium player first and foremost. I can play the other instruments, but I really want to focus on that. And it's, we have a saying at our school, which is, you wouldn't go to a proctologist for a problem with your heart, right? You would go to the specialist that teaches, that works on your heart, right? So you want to go to somebody who plays that instrument. However, the flip side to that coin is that this is a very specialized instrument. And as a young person who's going to be going to school for something like that, I encourage them to have lessons on trombone or tuba as well, just so that they can round out their opportunity to get employed and for more work. It's so difficult to get work. You're not going to get work unless you're in the military, unless you have a great day on your audition days. And even then you may not get the job. And there's so few of them. It's actually harder to become a professional euphonium player than it is to play in the NBA. There's fewer jobs, and there's the minute kind of chance for you to do that is crazy. So I always do encourage players to round out their abilities on other instruments. If you're a euphonium player, maybe doubling on tuba or doubling on trombone, or if you're really gifted and you have enough assets, because it's not cheap, to own an F tuba, a C tuba, and a bass trombone and a euphonium, you're probably talking about $40,000 worth of equipment there, but if you're a person who likes to play gigs and you like to play different church gigs and other types of gigs like that, and that's what you want to do, that's going to round out your playing more and round out your opportunity to get hired. So I come at that from a couple different angles. From the euphonium teaching standpoint, you want to get something that's very close to the mouthpiece size of what you're using, or the exact same mouthpiece, something that doesn't ruin the things that you're working on for your primary instrument. So I hope that helps. I definitely think that understanding the relationship of the instruments and other things that are going on, I think it all helps you. I don't think it makes you less of a musician. In some ways, me being a one-string banjo, just playing euphonium here, I mean, I can play trombone and I can play tuba, but not really well at all. I wouldn't just call myself a trombone player, but I know where the slide positions are and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's great. I understand that, and yeah, I don't usually tell people that I play those other instruments. I tell people I'm a euphonium player. I get it. I think we have time for one last question. It looks like Sarah also turned her camera on. So Sarah, do you have a question? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, that actually might be our time. Aaron, is there anything else that you want to offer before we head out?
Yeah, I would just say thank you for the opportunity. Again, I'll just reiterate what I said at the very beginning. I know I've talked a lot and I've played a lot and all that kind of stuff. If there's anything that's unclear, or that you want to strike up a conversation away from this, and we're not friends on Facebook, send me a Facebook friend request. and let's develop a dialogue. I'm happy to help. Again, I owe everything of what I've done with my life, to the Lord and to the Salvation Army through the Salvation Army. So I believe in these programs. I'm happy to see programs like this continuing on, being creative in times that are uncertain like this. And I can just tell you that by putting my faith in the Lord and doing the things that the Salvation Army has afforded me, it really has taken me all over the world and just enriched my life in so many ways that I never would have benefited otherwise, and just helped me to meet all sorts of different people, So it's that kind of thing that's just, you never know what the Lord has in store for you. Growing up, I never would have thought that I would be in New Jersey in 2020, and that I would have been here for almost 30 years already. So this is definitely home for me, but it's what the Lord had in store for me, so who knows what the Lord has in store for you, but just put your faith in him and go through the doors that he opens up to you, and listen to the people like Joel and Nick, because they know what they're talking about and they have good things planned for you.
Well, thank you, Aaron. And Nick, I see that you're back, so I'm going to turn it over to you. But thank you guys all for listening and for your questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel, for hosting that. Really appreciate that, and great job. And for Aaron. And Aaron really means it when he says, get in contact with me. I'm serious about that. He's one of the best mentors you could possibly wish for. So thanks, Aaron. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll maybe see a bunch of you at 1 o'clock for Andrew Blythe or Stephen Byrne at 3. And certainly, I hope you all tune into our solo night tonight at 7 p.m. We'll see you later, folks. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.